Welcome. It's episode 159 of Grow Yourself Up. And today I'm joined by a guest, Anne Power. And I'm going to tell you about Annie first, and then I'm going to tell you all about what we chatted about in this episode. So Anne Power first qualified at the Bowlby Centre and later trained at WPF, Tavistock Relationships and Relate. She has worked in various settings, but now works online with couples and parent with adult-child pairs. She has written many academic papers and 2 books. All of these use attachment theory to understand relationships and clinical experience. Her book, Contented Couples, is based on interviews with 18 long-term couples from different traditions, including arranged marriage. It explains couple dynamics in an accessible way and describes how partners' complementary attachment patterns can work well together. Anne posts on Instagram at the handle @attachment, and all of this detail will be in the show notes, by the way, with content for people who want to understand attachment in their relationships. Her TEDx talk, Attachment Theory is the Science of Love, also addresses this theme and has been watched by over 1 million people. And the link will be in the show notes. She has just finished writing a novel about a couple counselor and the diverse couples who come to see her. Do watch for news of publication of this novel on Instagram at @attachment, or on her website, where you can also download free PDFs on attachment things, which is contentedcouples.com. Okay, so it was really lovely to have this chat with Annie. We talked all about attachment styles. So she gives a brief explanation of how each attachment style is created in a family, and then we talk about how that might impact our parenting. And we both talked about how when we've had some sort of childhood trauma or some adversity or chronic stress, we most want to do in our children's childhood what we didn't have. And I talked about that, how I most want my children not to be my caretaker. And it's quite it's a touching and vulnerable segment where we kind of really acknowledge that. And what I also love about Annie's work on Instagram is how she brings the nuance about the different attachment styles, because particularly avoidant attachment often gets, people who are avoidantly attached often get a hard time on Instagram, particularly in couple relationships, where they're seen as kind of not coming forward and not being on the contact boundary. And she gives a much more nuanced perspective, because avoidant people also want connection and also have a lot of pain. It's just that what they've learned is safe, is different to what actually attached people have learned is safe, and how they've learned to kind of get their needs met in relationships. So she really kind of goes into that. And in the episode, we talk about such a wide variety of things. Some of Annie's childhood, her boarding school journey, finding her voice, and that's a very touching thing, which I think many of you will resonate with. And then we talked about care seeking and caregiving. So it's very wide ranging. And I think you'll find it helpful as you conceptualize of your own attachment and the attachment in your family and with your children. Okay, let's dive in. Hi, Annie. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me here today. I'm really delighted to have you.
Thank you for asking me, Cath.
Okay, so you're an attachment expert, and so I'm really excited to chat to you about all things attachment and some of your own journey and how that relates to parenting. So why don't you tell us a bit about your own attachment journey?
Lovely. I think like probably many people, I sort of shrink from the idea of being an expert, but sure, I'm lucky that my initial training in therapy was an attachment-based one. That was 30 years ago. So I've been steeped in it, yes. But in terms of my...
Let's claim it. Let's claim you're an expert, because I think that's a particularly woman thing, that we want to shy away from things. So I'm going to stick with that word expert.
Lovely. That's an interesting one when you say woman, because when I was thinking in advance of today, and there was a lovely question you put in your sort of ideas of where I might go. And one of them was, can you say something about, in attachment terms, about what parents might need from their children? And I just love that question because it's, straight up with the fact that we do need things of our children. And that is less than ideal, but it's much better that we face what it is we need. And I think I actually only have sons. I have 2 sons, which I'm very happy with. I love that. But so I haven't raised daughters. But I think something that can happen a little bit with mothers and daughters is certainly people of my age, which is 69, were raised when feminism wasn't really very strong. And so there can be a feeling, well, I want my daughter to have, to really know she's strong and all this kind of thing. But of course, what it amounts to is wanting the daughter to live out some of the mother's needs and
fantasies.
Fantasies.
Yeah, living out the mother's unlived life.
Yeah.
And that's just such a wonderful place to start, because I think that that's often so unconscious for so many of us, and often at odds with what the daughter might need. And also is very much of a time, because were you raised in thinking that you could have it all?
No, I was the pre that. Well, so if I answer your question about my attachment story, I mean, I was pre it in dates, but I was also pre it because my parents, I was the youngest child, and my parents were, either one was only, the other was a youngest child. So they were already quite, youngest child is sort of dated, ahead of themselves. So my parents were sort of more old fashioned, if you like, than they might have been.
Yes.
So I almost had a rather Victorian upbringing, really. Yes.
Tell us about it. What does that mean?
Well, what it means is that my parents, this is combined with the fact that there was largely avoidance in the household. It really does mean children seen and not heard. And it was only really when I was older, I saw it had applied more to me as the girl. Partly, I think, because I was a girl, partly I was the youngest one. My parents had been a little bit more involved, and they really had gone off the boil. My parents were functioning alcoholic, so and that was progressive. So by the time I came along, they really weren't on the job at all. Wow,
I just want to pause there, because I also had an alcoholic parent, and it's such a burden in so many ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to honor that, because I think what you're saying about being off the boil, it's kind of like you had to raise yourself.
Yes, and thank you. And of course, sort of out there will be people with alcoholic parents, which then subdivides, doesn't it, into so many different versions of that.
Yes.
Because there's a sort of my parents were not, fortunately, we could say, it wasn't a sort of chaotic alcoholism. It was but it just sealed the avoidance. There was no touching into any emotional or anything really that had real meaning, I would say. And then as my brothers had been ahead of me, and then I went to boarding school very young. So avoidant institution was sort of layered on top of avoidant home. And I'm not giving you every detail, because obviously I'm not, but I did come out of it quite scarred. And that was why I got my journey took me into therapy. I'd like to have got there a bit sooner, but I was lucky it wasn't, it was as soon as it was, shall we say, as a young adult. And but training actually the main therapy I went to was an attachment therapy. And that was luck, really, because when you're initially looking around for therapists, you don't really know the wood from the trees. So it's really a matter of who tells you what. And anyway, that's where I ended up. And then, therefore, that was the training that I chose to go to. And so that was a very great lesson, to fall into attachment so long ago when there wasn't as much of it about.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And because, if you're 69, so you were born, I was born in 76, so you were born in 56.
Yes, 56.
So in the shadow of the Second World War.
Very much. My parents have been, very involved in the Second World War, yeah.
And there weren't still food rations and things like that at
No,
that
it's
point, were there?
just past, yeah.
Just passed. And so do you think that some of the pain of the war had really impacted them?
I think it had impacted them, but it's so often with these things, you can't tell. A bit like, so I went to boarding school very young, and I have
It's like, what, 5 something?
six.
6.
I have become involved in a bit in the boarding school survivors movement, which I think is tremendous. But one of the things that can occur there is a little bit sort of blanket idea about boarding school does this to you, it's so much for me depends on your pre-existing attachment. And boarding school was very difficult for me, but actually not because I missed my home, because I was that avoidant that I didn't miss my home.
Yeah.
But it was awful for me because I landed in the class of a teacher who hated me and who was very cruel when I was 7. And
So sorry.
That was a terrible thing because you're so at the mercy. Yeah. So I already was the most subdued child. I became even more so. So the reason you see me sitting here doing this now at 69 is because I'm gradually finding my voice, really, from having been a completely squashed child. Yeah.
Oh, Annie, thank you for sharing that. That's so beautiful. And that's so touching. It actually makes me want to cry hearing that, because I mean, what a huge journey. And also you taking up space and letting you speak, is so encouraging for anyone who's listening and who's had a journey like that there is kind of some journey of hope.
Yes. Well, that's all there is, really, isn't there? Repair and hope. That's what we kind of live for, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about, so you're describing yourself as avoidantly attached.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit about what that actually means and how that might be created?
Yes. I think now I will sort of veer more into, what if I say theory, sort of not just me. And of course, there were some other strands. Most people have some different strands in their attachment. Anyway, the thing you said was, tell you about avoidance. So perhaps I can tell you about in a minute. I'll start again, and then I'll talk about avoidance, and then I guess I'll talk about anxious as well, won't I?
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe disorganized.
Yeah.
Yes. So thinking about avoidant attachment and how it arises. One thing we know from the longitudinal studies is that if the parents are insecure, even at the time of the pregnancy, there's a strong likelihood that the child will have insecure attachment. But the thing that isn't so sort of neatly designated is whether they'll be avoidant or anxious. Avoidant parents are quite likely to raise avoidant children, quite likely, but by no means always. They can raise, if other factors are favourable and the avoidance isn't too severe, they can raise secure children. Sometimes it does happen. And they sometimes raise anxious children, depending on almost the type of the avoidance.
Yes. And also, don't you think, just to interrupt, I think that there must be something also correlating with actually our brain and our level of sensitivity. Because if we are less sensitive and we have an avoidant parent, but they give us enough, we may be securely attached. Whereas if we're much more sensitively wired, we might need a lot more input and not get sufficient input.
Exactly. That's exactly it. To do with the inherent level of sensitivity in the child. Yes.
Yeah.
And I think as Brazelton has a lovely phrase, he talks about the fit between mother, caregiver and infant. And it's sort of sometimes just by luck, it sort of works quite well. But sometimes you get, for example, a very, a sort of agitated, very alive, wired mother and a rather sluggish baby. And that's not good. Or you get the rather, a very slow, flat mother and the very sort of highly sensitive, hyperactive baby, and that's not good. So there's a bit of luck in that, and that isn't just attachment.
Yes.
So, but thinking of a fairly average baby and an avoidant parent, the thing that will create avoidance is that the parent copes by not getting in touch with their own feelings because they haven't learned to regulate them. And by regulate, we don't mean get rid of them. We mean be able to travel through their feelings and be with them. Avoidant people are able to turn the feelings off, squash them, keep away from them.
Yeah.
And they don't want anything happening in their lives which disturbs that. Now, nothing is as well primed to disturb it as the child we love and that we're raising. So the child, this is the evolutionary bit that Bowlby gave us, the child learns to be the kind of child that the parents want, because that's how they'll get the best. They can keep in proximity. They can stay close and get looked after. And that's what evolution needs for survival of the species. So essentially, avoidant parent, very often the child will learn it's best to keep my feelings under wraps, look after myself, and only involve myself in relationships when I'm feeling good and just good to go.
Yes.
And that's the sort of simplified avoidance story. And then the anxious story is, and again, anxious parents can raise avoidant children, because if the anxiety takes the form of a lot of intrusion and the needing things from the child is sort of emphasized, then the child may learn to cut themselves off from that and develop a more avoidant strategy. But often the anxiety in the parent takes the form of being sometimes very warmly attuned, and there's a lot of sensitivity usually in anxiously attached people. So very very sensitive and very, very preoccupied and concerned with how is this child. So there might be a lot of inquiry, and that the parent needs to know that the child is okay. There could also be some difficulties with boundaries for an anxious person, and that can be transmitted to the child. So very often, the child in that sort of anxious household or with anxious parent learns that I can get the most care, I can get the most proximity by being skilled at getting attention. And that can mean turning up the volume, or it can mean, in some families, it means learning manipulative strategies.
Yeah. Or being just very adaptive and maybe being a perfectionist or being very pleasing for the parent, I think.
Yes, although I suppose I think that avoidant children can be quite into that really as well, I would say. They're very big on people pleasing, often avoidant.
Yes. It's interesting because I would say that I was anxiously attached and possibly a bit disorganized in some areas. And then did a big journey towards own secure attachment. But in motherhood, I've been much more anxiously attached, wanting to make sure they're okay. And really noticing that I could crowd their feelings out. I really have to tend to myself and really have my own therapy and keep my stuff to me in a way so that there's space for their emotions. Because I think that when there's so much big stuff coming from the parent, they literally crowd out space for the children's, everything, basically.
Well, I think it's interesting that you mentioned perfectionism, and maybe we don't have to try and sort of sort out perfectionism in anxious and in avoidant people. I just think it can be in both. And I think I certainly can identify with the parental behavior of wanting the children to be okay. Then I can feel more okay, because if the children aren't, and this obviously this just applies to so many parents, but it applies in different ways. For some parents, it's, I need my children to be going to Oxford and becoming a doctor. That's a form of, and for others, it's I need my child to be smiling.
Yes. Yeah. I need my child to be cheerful because I can't cope with their kind of negative affect. And tell us a bit about, because I remember in my own training, thinking I'm definitely anxiously attached. And then when I did some training with Janina Fisher, thinking, oh my word, I'm definitely disorganized, and finding that very kind of distressing in some way. But I actually think that there's a lot of us who have quite a lot of elements of disorganization. Can you talk us a bit about disorganized attachment?
Yes. And I think many of the diagrams show a kind of circle and security at the top anxious and avoidant either side, and then disorganized at the bottom, or the other side of the circle. So it's disorganized is the furthest you can get from secure, but actually highly avoidant or highly anxious sort of merges into disorganized, essentially.
Yes.
For sure. I feel I was avoidant, but with disorganized, disorganized traits. And I hope I earned security. I certainly did enough therapy that I should have it. But but I think it's quite good to remember that Pat Crittenden, she's a different strand in the attachment research. She, in her nomenclature, she just has, she calls it slightly differently. She calls it A type and C type, but essentially avoidant and anxious, and they just sort of join up at the bottom. She doesn't
go into disorganized.
With disorganized. So just if you're highly avoidant, that is like disorganized and highly anxious. So she really gradates how anxious you can be, mildly or quite or severely in the anxious or avoidant. And I think that's quite useful in a way, to remember that everything is on a continuum.
Yeah. And it can be quite distressing because as we listen for this, as we listen and we are parenting our own children, so lots of the listeners will be trying to recover from their own childhood trauma and parenting at the same time. And it's very distressing as a person in early postpartum or as a young parent to realize that that in your early couple of years of a child's life that maybe you couldn't have been present for them because you were so yourself distressed or your nervous system was in such a state of survival. Mm. But I think that the attachment literature has actually got such hope in that space in terms of improving relationships. And can you talk us a bit around that?
Yes, lovely. Well, I think one thing attachment can help with, in a sense, that quite a big part of attachment theory in Bowlby's work is about grief and how we grieve. And I think the first bit that you described, the distress in parents when they realize the ways in which they haven't been attuned and present for their children, it is a kind of grief. I'm not the mother I would have loved to be. I haven't been the mother I would have loved to be. And it's much better I can grieve that and sort of come to terms with it rather than be going, oh, it's so terrible, because that is a burden to the children when the mother is going, I sort of do speak from my own experience here. If the mother gets almost off on, how badly I've done this, and that is a terrible burden for the children, and they have to manage themselves in respect of it. So that's not great.
Almost to try and help the mother think she hasn't done it so badly. Do you know what I mean? So if we do our own grieving, we're tending to our own emotional life much more, I think.
Yes. And I don't think we make it better for people by saying, oh, you didn't do it too badly, really, because actually some people have done it badly. Some of us have done it badly as in inverted commas. But so I think grieving, being able to own it is tremendous, but then having owned it, to be able to meet ourselves with compassion, and so that this compassion almost makes it possible to grieve. And then there can be the repair from that. And I do some of my work. I work with couples, but I also work with dyads, which are one parent with an adult child. And I think it's just tremendous when those dyads come to therapy and repair. They can come at any age.
Yes.
And that's beautiful.
Yeah, that's fantastic that there is so much potential for growth and willingness, actually, because there has to be a lot of willingness there, because especially on social media, there's a lot about adult children being estranged, and that's devastating. That must be really devastating.
Well, I think it is utterly devastating. The children feel so bereaved because they've got no family, and the parents feel sometimes bewildered, sometimes they don't know what it's really about, and shame, terrible shame. I think the children feel shame as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm always happy to hear when my parents are dead, but I often hear about when I hear about people who are having an opportunity to rebuild with parents who didn't give what they needed and who are now learning maybe what they would better or really dealing with their own trauma. I just find it so heartening. So I think it's what I really think might be useful is to chat about a personal attachment journey. So I'll tell you a bit about my journey and about care giving and care seeking, because I was really interested in what you said earlier about how sometimes mothers need things or parents need things from their children, and that that's obviously difficult for the children because, and many of us, I grew up in an alcoholic household with a mother who was had various different issues, and I was the kind of caregiver. I was the eldest of 5 children, one who died, and I extended a lot of care to everyone, and I was kind of anxiously attached. And then my father was the alcoholic, and so I've, that idea that you're attracted to the same type of people as your opposite sex parents. So I would be attracted to very avoidant men, and for me, love felt like I need to try hard and get you to be pleased with me. That's what I felt with boyfriends. So I had like some real terrible, unkind boyfriends, or I went out with work addicts, sex addicts, those types who kind of had the same sort of patterning. And then, like by the grace of God, I met my husband, and he's much more avoidant than me. So I'm more contact seeking. But that's really been a mutual place of blossoming. And I feel so profoundly grateful for that. And that has helped me with my own attachment. But I'd obviously done a lot of therapy before that. Can you tell us a bit about this path around how we all need care? That like our attachment figures, the importance of our attachment figures doesn't go away in adulthood.
Oh, yes. And Bowlby used this phrase, from cradle to grave. We need an attachment figure, someone bigger and wiser to whom we can turn. And in a adult couple bond, the bigger and wiser is each other, but it varies who's being the bigger and wiser. And that is so important for parents because they are doing something monumental in being available to these very demanding little creatures who are, it's sort of like 24-hour therapist in some ways, the parental roles. So
yes,
having a reliable, wider family, and that, in our culture, that usually amounts to having the prime person we look to as an attachment figure is a couple, a partner in a couple, but obviously that isn't the case for everyone.
Yeah.
Whether or not we've got the reliable, secure bond with a partner in a couple, the wider family and the neighborhood is important as well. That really is important. And this can be hard for people who change countries. They don't have anyone local, but of course, there's many people whose mother is down the road, but she's not able to be any sort of support at all. So every case is different, but having a couple bond where things are developing and we're learning is just a bedrock for parents. I think my partner and I, we were slow learners, but we sort of picked up speed as time went on, perhaps we could say. But I think there's a lot of hope if we're just turning the dial a little bit. If we manage to pass on to our children less of the trauma than we lived with, that I really think is something to celebrate.
Yes.
It can be very hard for parents because they struggle enormously, and let's hope they do manage to do something more attuned and responsive than their parents could give. But it may still not really be great, and it may not be enough. And the children can be quite disappointed. And when they register that disappointment, the parents can feel quite hurt because they really, really did their best. And the children sort of have no idea quite what the parents went through in their own early lives. And sometimes the parents kind of want to go, you have no idea. Guess what it was like for me? And that is rightly a sort of terrible trope of parents. You should have been young when I was young, and we had to break the ice on the water tub and all this kind of thing. But
yes,
usually it's true that parents who are struggling really have lived through some pretty grim things. And it's hard for them when their children seem to be kicking off about something that seems smaller. But having a secure relationship, because ideally there's two parents who care equally about the children, and so the one person you can then really rely on to talk with about what's going on is the other parent. This is how we hope it is. But and sometimes in step parent families, there can be tremendously skilled support from step parents. So there's all kinds of ways it can work. But obviously many people are in households where they're living with the two natural parents, but there is not the loving support. And one of the very difficult things that sometimes happens is people in families get into roles. So the children can get into roles. So you get the kind of naughty one and the clever one and the fun one and this sort of, which is no good for anyone. I mean, it looks worse for the one who's been labelled as trouble, but actually it's not great for the golden child who's, sworn to be the good one. They also are living in a kind of prison.
Yeah.
But the parents can get into roles, and not infrequently, one of the things in families is that one parent has become the good parent and the other has become the bad parent.
Yes.
And that's, as working systemically, I just take it's never accurate. There's something that's gone on there that has meant that through projections, this has happened.
Yes. And there's so much richness in what you've just brought up, because I think that really understanding, I always say, I've often said this on the podcast, that understanding our parents' childhood and even our grandparents' childhood can be really helpful in terms of understanding what we're grappling with. And lots of I was a terrible perfectionist. In some ways, I still am. And so I really had this idea that I was going to shift everything. But it's impossible to shift everything, really impossible to shift everything. And I saw a picture of one video of Gabor Mate saying that you get this much from your parents and then you just give your children this much, to really, what she just said, that we just give them a little bit less.
Yes.
And one thing that I've noticed, even with my children, is that when they are disappointed by, they're 9 only, so they'll be 10 at their next birthday. But when they are disappointed with me or they're really upset, if I just hold space for that and don't argue with them, and just really honor their disappointment, it dissipates. I imagine that will be harder if they pick apart things I did when they're 25. And I might tend to be defensive at that point. But so much of it seems that the parent has to, in some sense, honor how the child felt at that time, which is a hard thing because that's very therapeutic, that's holding. And parents might just want to go, no, that's not the truth of what happened. Because parenting is just such a huge, like what you said about being a 24/7 therapist. Yes. Mm-hmm. And with no training. So no wonder it's such a struggle. I really want to kind of give hope. And I want to return to what you were saying about.
Can I respond to the one thing you said there?
Yes,
which
please.
Is, but I think that's lovely. You're saying that with 9-year-old children, you have built that capacity to be present and, what you said was hold the space when they're disappointed in you. And you said perhaps it'd be harder when they're 25. I don't think so. I think this is what's so great, that if we can build good relationships early, they're there to sort of go forward. And I think being able to talk to children about the relationship we have with them, just like being able to speak to our partner about the relationship we have with them, is just one of the wonderful things we can do that will contribute to us being the best we can. And I think we can be doing that, talking to the child about the relationship from the beginning, really, so that even when they're pre-verbal, we might go, oh, silly mummy, I did get impatient then, didn't I? Or whatever it is. And we're modeling, and then we just carry it forward in a more appropriate language. And then it becomes less just us doing the talking and us doing more of the listening, whilst they tell us off, which isn't they tell us off and we fall down in a crumpled heap. Not that at all. But, but that they know that what they say will be respected.
Yes.
And we expect them to behave respectfully around us as well.
Yes. And also that thing about that we can withstand them. They're not going to break us with, like, we can withstand and contain them. Mm-hmm. And I think that role of us containing their worst bits helps them then with containing themselves at their worst moments without splitting that self off or punishing that self or really shaming that self.
Oh, for sure. That's like one of the most central parts of the task, I think, yes.
Because I have really had to really work to kind of grab back in a whole lot of my own self states and, integrate those. And what you said about when the mum was commenting about, oh, I was a bit irritated then or whatever you said, I think that kind of role of kind of sportscasting what's going on then helps with their own ability to mentalize.
Yes. And
we're doing that mentalizing for them. And that alone... because sometimes my children say back to me, if I'm shouting or if I'm getting kind of ratty with them, then they're like, sometimes they tell me to take a breath or sometimes I taught them that they can push against a wall when they're feeling really cross. And they've say that back to me sometimes. And I often have shame about that. I'm like, oh my God, I'm being such a terrible mother. But then I'm like, oh no, it's good that they can they see we're in a relationship and they're giving me back a resource that I've given them.
Yes. Yes.
And so then I feel heartened because what I don't want to do is make my children care for me in the way that I really had to be the caregiver. Mm-hmm. But to some extent, I think there is mutual reciprocity.
Yes. I think that's a lovely issue about sort of, I think we must let our children care for us. I think it's beautiful, but obviously it's a continuum and there's a place where it would become too much. But I think you pointed to something really interesting there where you said, what I most want is I don't want my children to care for me. And probably you could go down a row of all the parents and say, what's the thing you most wanted? And it's the thing that we did that was wrong in our childhood, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, it makes me want to cry, actually. Yeah, exactly. And what I most want is not to be an alcoholic as well. And I don't drink.
As well, absolutely, yes. But for me, I see one of my most wants is I don't want my children to perceive the world or experience it as flat and meaningless. Because that was the form that alcohol took in my home. It was a dampener. Everything was just dampened to nothing. So I most want my children to be interested in the world and engaged and curious.
Yes. Well, and how did you recover your own curiosity and kind of make that safe and kind of grow a landscape?
Well, as for many people, the answer to that comes when it wasn't coming from the home. There was a particular teacher I got something from. And I think there was a particular teacher I had when I was 9, when I really, I'd say sort of 7, 8, 9 were some of my worst years. I was just so flat. And as a very helpful therapist once said to me, and you were past being cute. Because not that I was particularly cute, but actually sort of all children up to about 6, there is a sort of cuteness.
Yes.
And so I was through that. I was just so boring. I was terribly boring to myself and definitely boring to other people.
Oh, that's so harsh.
Well, I think I was very depressed. Definitely hopeless, but I mean, hopeless almost wouldn't have fitted it because I didn't have. So almost for hopeless to have meaning, you almost have to know what hope is, and I just
Yes.
didn't. It was just flat. And then I was in the class of this teacher, and I was in that flatness, I was the most well-behaved, good child. But there must have always been something there, because when I was 7, I did run away from the boarding school. So,
oh, I love that.
Yes, I love it.
That's a lot of oomph.
Yeah, it's sort of, that itself was sort of like an anchor for me, that there was something alive there. Anyway.
Yes.
But when I was 9, I had a teacher who, she liked me because I was so good and well behaved.
Yeah.
But she also liked me because the main thing, she taught everything through getting us to write stories. So whether it was history, English, almost any subject really, we were writing stories. And maybe I had some luck, or I wrote some stories that she really liked. And then because she was liking my stories, I don't feel I'd had anyone like anything really before. And so I really began to do well under her, and have some belief that I could be interesting. That's what it was. So that was a new thing. And then I began to realize there are things you can do. And it was very gradual, I would say. I was still very, very quiet and so on. But I had some belief that I could be interesting, and I could be interested in the world. So that was just wonderful. Mm.
Yeah. That's so beautiful, because that kind of hope is a grain in that relationship,
Mm-hmm.
and being seen by her is so life-giving.
Yeah, being seen, yeah. Because that simply hadn't had when you're a little child and people go, oh, that's nice. You know, that hadn't been there. So
Yeah.
It was wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful, Annie. Thank you for sharing that. I want to return to something you said about when we are perhaps feeling kind of grief, or we're feeling sad about how we might have tended to our children, and about the hope. You talked about grief, how important it is to grieve and to acknowledge stuff. You talked about self-compassion. Do you also want to talk a bit about how it's so important from an attachment point of view to make sense of our own story?
I think making sense of our own story and attachment is a wonderful lens through which to do it. It's obviously just one of many lenses, but I think it's a very clear, realistic, and compassionate one. But it's also important to remember that understanding does not equate to therapeutic change. That it's a great tool. It's a brilliant tool, but we do need some kind of emotional engagement, really, through a relationship. I mean, to some degree, some of it can be self-generated, but I think if we've been really very insecure, that's very difficult for it to be all. It needs to come through relationships, and therapy is the one where designed specifically to provide that. And then it's not just about understanding, it's about allowing the space, as your phrase from earlier, it's about allowing the space for the hurt parts to be present, so that we know we're not so frightened of them, and we in sort of showing ourselves that we can be with those feelings, we become much stronger.
Yeah.
Carry on. Well, I seem to be in my mind somehow wanting to go to this issue about care seeking and caregiving, which I think is quite, because this is one where if we're looking for tools, so I said then that understanding by itself is not enough, but it does help. And one of the sort of particular ways where I think it helps is understanding our attachment relationship in terms of how we seek care and how we give care.
Yes.
Our pattern, the pattern of the people around us. And it very much applies between partners as well as children. And Bowlby had identified different types of caregiving, like this compulsive caregiving. Caregiving sounds nice, but it isn't always nice. It can be controlling, compulsive. And of course, care seeking can be an anxious pattern, can lead us into a sort of relentless care-seeking cycle, which is exhausting.
Yes.
And so I think some of the research points to there are 5 key elements in what the ways we can almost measure and understand, let's say, care seeking first of all. So the first one is our internal working model of self and other. This is an attachment phrase. Internal working model is the template, the way I understand myself and the other. So for a secure person, they have a sense of themselves as lovable. That's the belief about themselves that they took in that lovely, secure home. And they have a belief about the other as dependable. So if they're in a relationship with a partner or a parent, they believe that the other person actually wants to help them. That's their starting point, which is just like such a wonderful thing. So when that secure person is distressed, they've had a bad day at work, they actually they have a belief that they are entitled to ask for help, and a belief that their partner wants to help them. So when they come in and they say, "Oh, I had an absolutely terrible day," and the partner just keeps scrolling on the phone or doing the job they were doing, they'll say, "Oh, listen to me, please. I had a terrible day at work." They don't mind asking again, making another bid, because they know their partner would listen if they could get their attention.
Yes.
So it's the first element is the sense of ourself and other, the belief about self and other. The next one is being able to make a bid for attention. The next one is being able to, this is to do with mentalization, being able to sort of speak quite clearly and present the issue. Because avoidant people, I mean, they will find it difficult to ask for help at all, but if they do, they might ask in a very succinct kind of way that doesn't really give enough detail. Anxious people might actually make it so long-winded that the person listening, even if they want to help, sort of slightly loses the plot.
Yes.
So that's the kind of cognitive.
I do that sometimes.
And there's the cognitive bit. And then the next bit is the emotional message. So again, avoidant people might manage to say, "I had a really bad day at work," but they say it in a tone that the other person isn't going to really pick up, that they're terrible. They're on the point of being, made redundant or something like this. And the anxious person, they are at risk of bringing out not the really significant feeling that needs help, but the reactive feelings, we would say in EFT, which is how I currently do therapy. Well, currently is the way I definitely do therapy now. I think it'll be till I finish. But I came to it quite late in life. So we talk quite a lot about primary feelings. Those tend to be the vulnerable feelings, the longing, the fear.
Yes.
The reactive feelings are the anger and criticism. So the anxious person can be very upset about something and they can say, "But I've told him. But what they've actually done is they've expressed resentment and criticism that their partner never listens to them,
Yes.
which is a sort of completely different opening and sends their care-seeking attempt all over the place. And then the final of the 5 things is how we do at receiving the care. Because a secure person, if they seek help from their partner responds, they're able to receive it, whether it's a hug, listening, whatever. For the anxious person, the thing that makes anxious attachment so painful and exhausting is that even when the care is forthcoming, the anxious person can't relax because they know they're very likely to lose it. They've lost it a million times in the past. And so the anxious child who asks to be picked up, parent picks them up and the child arches away. They're still saying, "Help me, help me." Even the parents actually just pick them up because they can't just mold into the parent and receive the lovely ventral support, which would help their nervous system.
Yeah. And I guess if someone has a child that's doing that, how could they help them?
So if I'm helping my child is anxious and not able to take in the soothing.
Yeah.
Well, then that's when being a therapist really comes. The parent parent therapy job is so big. And this is the pain, that if we're very insecure and we're raising our children will have some insecurities. And I'm saying we with intent here, as one of this group, then the most painful thing is it has now become an even more skillful job to parent this child. And the parent is less equipped for it. The secure parent raises secure children, and they're faced with less difficult moments because of what, but they're more equipped to face them. The insecure parent is faced with some very difficult moments, and they're less equipped for them. So there isn't a short answer to this. It is largely the thing you really promote, which is the parent equipping themselves to have a place to take their misery, about their sadness, about times when they haven't been good enough.
And also, I think this is it's kind of a cruel paradox that I kind of allude to all the time, that those of us who most want to do things differently are also the group who are least likely to be able to do things differently with our current architecture.
Oh, current architecture is very good, yes.
Because my current architecture, not now actually, not my current architecture, but my previous architecture was very much insecure attachment, very reactive nervous system. And so my biggest job has been tending to my own nervous system and coming to a really securely attached place of thinking, I'm okay. Like, I'm not ever going to be a perfect mother or whatever, but this is all good enough and it's beautiful. But when I first kind of, that paradox landed in my brain, I just felt so angry and sad about it, that I've got so much information, because often this group, I include myself in this group, are such amazing researchers as well, perfectionist researchers. So we know everything, but our architecture can't execute what we know because the learning is not yet embodied. And I think that's so true about what you said about the attachment thing, that we can have all the understanding in the world, but until we've done our own internal work and it's traveled from our head to our heart and our whole body, we can't implement any change. That's just, anyway. I'm just noticing the time, Annie. I loved hearing that last piece. Can I just I want to respond to one thing, because I really recognize my husband and I in what you said. I am much more, because I did the first EFT externship. I've never gone on to complete the training, but I love Sue Johnson's work. And I was like, oh yes, I'm the care seeker. I'm now much more securely attached, so I can always tell him what I need, but I sometimes lose him in all the detail of the story or the drama of the story, without getting to my deep pain and longing about what is actually my actual pain in that story. And when he tells me some things, because he's more avoidant, sometimes he waits ages to tell me, well, like maybe a day. To me, that's ages, because if like something bad happened, he should tell me immediately. Or he is very minimal in the way he tells the story. So he, in marriage with me, has kind of grown his emotional landscape now, so he can tell more of the actual content of it. But I can really see those patterns reflected. So thank you for painting that so beautifully for us.
Well, that's a really lovely trajectory you've described there of you and your husband. And that, going back to the way you described it initially, where you said we're drawn to people, I would say, who carry the underdeveloped part of the self. And then if it, in a relationship that's growing and developing, the two partners gradually re-own those. So they become the one who was the most avoidant is able to soften some of that and show a bit more vulnerability. And the one who was more anxious is able to contain more. Whereas some couples have the horrible experience of polarizing, and that means the anxious one is becoming ever more anxious and reactive, and the avoidant one ever more withdrawing and closed down. And this is exactly where EFT comes into its own.
Yes, EFT is very beautiful for that. Very, very beautiful. I had an amazing therapist who, because I met my husband quite late. I only met him when I was just before 37. And I met him online, and I'd done a whole bunch of online dating before that. But I found it extremely complex and anxiety provoking. And my therapist stepped me through all of the stuff around, keeping on coming back to the present moment, trying to contain myself, because I could see how in previous relationships I had sprayed all my anxiety all over the place. And then, of course, the avoidant runs that way. Do you know what I mean? They run away. So therapy has been life-giving to me. I'm passionate about the power of therapy. So tell us, how can people work with you? Tell us about your TED Talk and your books. How can they interact with you?
Well, thank you so much. Well, Instagram is the place where I mostly am doing stuff. So I love people to follow and comment, of course. I love that. And where my handle is _attachment. Yeah, I think you have that.
Yeah, and then we'll be in the show notes.
Yeah, well, I've got the TEDx talk on attachment, which of course is great if people look at. I love that. My most recent book is called Contented Couples, Magic, Logic or Luck. Well, not so recent now, it's 3 years. But that book, I can recommend it because it's all about the 18 couples who I interviewed. So it's their stories that make the book. So it makes it kind of easy for me to promote it because they were so generous in sharing their stories. They're all long-term couples. So they're not just recently got together and dewy-eyed about it. They're long-term seasoned couples, but who have worked at being a couple and found that deeply fulfilling and were willing to share. And they come from very diverse backgrounds, including arranged marriages. So it's not just Western romantic. And some of them are online, of course, and marriage bureaus of the past, that sort of thing. But what I'm doing at the moment is I have more or less finished a book, which is also about couples, but it's fiction. It's about 5 couples go to therapy. So it's about a fictional therapist and 5 cases. And so I've enjoyed writing it so much. And I'm just trying to sort out an agent, and then I hope it will, hopefully perhaps it will come out next year. We'll see.
Oh, wonderful. Well done. That's wonderful. Does it have a title yet?
Well, my proto title is 5 Couples Go to Therapy, but I'm working on 1 or 2 other thoughts. So yeah, I can't promote the exact thing. But, yeah.
Okay, but so they can look out for in 2026. Thank you so much for all that you've shared, and for when we hear other people's pain, it helps us be more with our own pain. And I think that I think a lot of the pain that we have from childhood is that no one helped us hold our pain. And that we thought we were defective for having pain, that we should all be, like what you said about being just good, basically. And that causes us more pain because then we have to feel like we have to split off our pain and vulnerability. And so I just really want to honor that and kind of say thank you for sharing some of your stuff with us.
I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you, Cath.